The sky was cloaked in heavy gray clouds, casting an eerie shadow over the small village. The air felt thick, as if it carried an unspoken weight, pressing down on those gathered for Jessica's funeral. The mourners stood in solemn silence, their faces pale and somber. Some held tissues to their tear-streaked cheeks, while others simply stared at the coffin, lost in their own thoughts. The only sound was the soft whisper of the wind weaving through the trees, as if nature itself was paying its final respects. Then, Lucky, Jessica's loyal dog, sprang to his feet. A deep growl rumbled from his throat before he erupted into a frenzied barking fit, his eyes locked onto the closed coffin. At first, the villagers thought he was merely grieving, refusing to accept his owner's passing. But as his barking grew louder, more desperate, unease spread among the crowd. Something was wrong. The air suddenly felt colder, a chill creeping up their spines. As the mystery deepens and the tension in the village mounts, I invite you to stay with us. Keep watching as we unravel this chilling story. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe a spirit can linger? What do you think Jessica's dog Lucky is trying to communicate? Engage with us, share this video with others, and stay tuned as we explore the eerie occurrences and uncover the hidden truths in this small village. Together, we might just discover what shadows linger beyond the grave. A strong gust of wind swept through the church, snuffing out several candles at once. The flickering flames seemed to tremble, as if afraid of something unseen. A few villagers glanced around nervously, their gazes darting toward the darkened corners of the room. In the distance, a shadow flickered, a figure moving where no one should be. An elderly woman clutched her shawl, her voice a mere whisper. Her spirit. It hasn't left yet. Father Thomas stood at the front of the church, his hands gripping the edges of the pulpit as if steadying himself against an unseen force. His normally calm and authoritative presence seemed shaken. The flickering candlelight cast shadows across his face, emphasizing the sweat glistening on his forehead. He took a slow breath, forcing a smile. "Everyone, please, remain calm," he said, his voice steady, but lacking conviction. He stole a quick glance at Lucky, the dog that had not stopped barking at the coffin. The animal's eyes gleamed with an intensity that sent a ripple of unease through the church. Lucky's furious barking echoed against the wooden walls, relentless and desperate. The dog's posture was rigid, his hackles raised, his gaze fixed on the closed casket. It was as if he saw something that no one else could. Something inside. Father Thomas cleared his throat, gripping the rosary in his hands a little too tightly. "It's just a dog," he said with a forced chuckle. "He's grieving like the rest of us." But his fingers trembled as he wiped his brow. A gust of wind howled through the church, extinguishing the last of the candles, plunging the space into near darkness. Several villagers gasped. A young woman clutched her child closer. The oppressive silence that followed was broken only by Lucky's relentless barking. Whispers spread through the crowd. Why wouldn't the priest look at the coffin? Why was he so desperate to move on with the ceremony? An old man leaned toward his wife. "He knows something," he murmured. Father Thomas's smile faltered. His breathing became uneven. The walls of his deception were closing in. Among the mourners stood a man who did not quite belong. James, a traveler who had only recently arrived in the village, watched the unfolding scene with quiet intensity. Unlike the others, who dismissed Lucky's barking as grief or hysteria, James felt something deeper, a cold shiver crawling down his spine, warning him that the dog was sensing something beyond human perception. James had always been different. From a young age, he had an uncanny ability to sense things others could not. A shift in the air, a presence in an empty room, a truth buried beneath lies. Now, as he stood in the dimly lit church, every instinct screamed at him that something was very wrong. Lucky, as if recognizing James as an ally, briefly stopped barking and turned his eyes toward him. The dog's gaze was sharp, pleading, almost human-like in its desperation. James felt an odd connection, as if Lucky was trying to communicate something only he could understand. Slowly, James stepped forward, his boots echoing against the stone floor. All eyes turned to him, curious, wary. He ignored their whispers and focused on Lucky, crouching beside the dog. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, his voice calm but firm. Lucky let out a low whimper before fixing his stare back on the coffin. James followed his gaze, and the moment his eyes landed on the casket, a sharp, ice-cold sensation gripped his chest. It was as if something inside was looking back at him. Behind him, someone hissed, "Leave the dog alone." But James barely heard them. His pulse pounded in his ears. He didn't know what was inside that coffin, but he was certain Jessica's death was no accident. James felt a cold dread creeping up his spine as he stared at the coffin. Something wasn't right. He had seen death before, but never had he felt this overwhelming sense of unease, like a presence lingering, watching, waiting. Lucky's growls deepened, his body tense as if bracing for something unseen. Summoning his courage, James reached out, resting his hand on the coffin's surface. The wood was unnaturally cold, sending a chill through his palm. Then, in the suffocating silence of the church, a faint thump came from inside the coffin. The entire room froze. A few gasps escaped trembling lips. Had they all imagined it? Lucky let out a sharp, guttural bark, his claws scraping against the floor. James felt his heart hammering against his ribs. He turned to Father Thomas, whose face had drained of all color. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his eyes darting between the casket and the villagers, as if calculating his next move. "Enough of this nonsense," the priest suddenly snapped, his voice too sharp, too desperate. "Jessica is at peace. Let us not disgrace her memory with wild imaginations." James didn't believe him. He could see the fear hidden behind the priest's forced authority. He could hear the whispers spreading through the crowd. Fear, suspicion, doubt. The candles flickered violently. Another gust of wind howled through the church, snuffing out the last of the flames. The room plunged into darkness. Then, another sound. A long, slow scraping noise from inside the coffin. Someone let out a choked cry. A woman clutched her rosary, whispering prayers under her breath. James clenched his fists. Something was trying to get out. The air inside the church felt heavier, thick with an unseen force pressing down on everyone present. The scraping noise from within the coffin had shaken the villagers to their core. Some were whispering prayers. Others were frozen in silent terror. But James felt something else, a pull, an urgent need to uncover the truth. Father Thomas, still pale and visibly shaken, made a feeble attempt to regain control. "There is nothing to fear," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Jessica is at peace." But James wasn't convinced. He turned to Lucky, who stood rigid, his ears perked, his breath slow and deliberate. The dog wasn't barking anymore, but his eyes were locked onto the casket, his muscles coiled as if preparing for something unseen. James knew there was only one way to get answers. He had to learn more about Jessica, who she was, what she knew before she died. Without another word, he turned and left the church, ignoring the startled murmurs behind him. The night air was sharp and cold as James made his way through the empty streets. The village, once warm and inviting, now felt hollow, abandoned, haunted. Shadows stretched unnaturally beneath the flickering street lamps, as if something was watching from just beyond the glow. Jessica's house stood at the edge of the village, a small stone cottage, its garden long overgrown. The front door was slightly ajar, creaking softly in the wind, a warning. But James stepped inside. Dust coated the furniture, and a strange, musty smell lingered in the air. It felt as though the house had been left untouched for years. Yet, something was off. Some objects seemed to have been recently moved. As James searched the house, Lucky sniffed along the wooden floor, his nose twitching as if following a scent only he could detect. Then, in the dim glow of the moonlight filtering through the cracked window, James spotted it. A wooden box resting on an old desk. Inside were letters, old photographs, and a leather-bound journal. The pages were yellowed, but the ink was fresh enough to read. As James flipped through, his pulse quickened. Jessica had known something. She had written about strange occurrences at the church, about secrets hidden beneath the altar, and most chillingly, she had feared for her life. A sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut behind him. James turned sharply, heart pounding. The journal trembled in James's hands as he read Jessica's final words. I have seen what lies beneath the church. The whispers in the dark. The shadows that move when no one is watching. Father Thomas is hiding something. Something evil. If anything happens to me, promise me, someone will uncover the truth. A sudden chill crawled down James's spine. Lucky let out a low, warning growl, his ears flattened, his body stiff. Then, a creak. A floorboard behind him groaned under an unseen weight. James froze, his breath catching in his throat. Slowly, he turned his head, scanning the dimly lit room. The door was still shut, the windows latched, but a shadow lingered in the corner, darker than the rest of the room. It was motionless, silent, watching. Then, in the suffocating quiet, a whisper slithered through the air. Not a voice, but something else. A breath, cold and unnatural, pressing against his ear. James lunged for the door, shoving it open, spilling out into the night. The village was silent, but not with peace. It was the silence of something unnatural, something waiting. He had to move. He ran straight for the church, Lucky close on his heels, his paws barely making a sound against the stone streets. The towering structure loomed ahead, its steeple piercing the stormy sky like a skeletal finger. The front doors were unlocked. They creaked open as if expecting him. Inside, darkness swallowed the pews, shadows twisting unnaturally along the walls. The air was thick, stale, as if it hadn't been disturbed in centuries. James forced himself forward, gripping the journal tightly. He followed Jessica's notes, her words guiding him toward the altar. The place where she had written. The entrance is beneath the stone. James dropped to his knees, running his hands over the cold floor. Then, his fingers brushed against something out of place, a small groove. He dug his nails in, and pulled. A slab of stone shifted with a deep, rumbling groan, revealing a gaping black void beneath the altar. A wave of cold air burst forth from the opening, carrying with it the faintest scent of rotting earth and something else. Something long buried. Then, from deep within the darkness below, a whisper, a rasping voice that should not exist. "You shouldn't have come." The church was drenched in darkness, its ancient walls trembling as if they were holding their breath. James stood near the altar, his heartbeat pounding like war drums in his ears. Lucky growled beside him, his body tense, his fur bristling. And then, from the shadows, Father Thomas emerged. But this was no longer the man who had once led prayers in this very church. His eyes were black voids, empty pits that swallowed the light. His skin was ashen, stretched too tightly over his bones, his mouth twitching as he whispered cursed words under his breath. "You should have left it alone," Thomas rasped, his voice layered, as if something else was speaking through him. His body twitched unnaturally, and the shadows behind him seemed to writhe, as if alive. James didn't move. He had seen enough to know that this was no longer just a man. Then, Thomas lunged. His speed was unnatural, a blur of shadows and whispers, his fingers claw-like, reaching for James's throat. But before he could strike, Lucky launched forward, teeth sinking deep into Thomas's arm. A horrible, inhuman shriek tore through the church. The air vibrated with a frequency that made James's skin crawl. Thomas staggered back, his arm twitching, black smoke seeping from the wound where Lucky had bitten him. James didn't hesitate. He reached into his coat and pulled out a silver cross, gripping it so tightly his knuckles turned white. "This ends now." He stepped forward and thrust the cross toward Thomas's chest. The reaction was instant. The shadows recoiled violently, the church walls shook, and Thomas let out a scream that was no longer human. His body began to convulse. Black tendrils of darkness writhing around him, resisting, fighting. But James didn't stop. He pressed the cross closer, its silver glowing with an ethereal light. The thing inside Thomas shrieked, a sound not meant for human ears. The darkness consuming him burned, disintegrating, and from within the suffocating void, a soft voice whispered, "Thank you, Jessica." For a brief second, her spirit shimmered, her eyes filled with sorrow and gratitude. Then, like a breath of wind, she was gone. Thomas collapsed to the ground, his body reduced to ash. The church trembled one last time before silence fell. Lucky let out a soft whimper, his body still trembling. James placed a hand on his head, his own breath shaky. It was over. The moment Father Thomas's body crumbled into ash, the entire church shook violently, as if it were taking its final breath. The wooden beams above groaned, dust and debris rained down from the ceiling, and the stone floor beneath James's feet began to crack. "We have to get out of here!" James gasped, grabbing Lucky's collar and pulling him toward the exit. The dog, still trembling from the battle, let out one last growl at the fading remains of Thomas before bolting alongside James. Behind them, the altar collapsed inward, the cursed shadows spiraling into the ground, vanishing into the abyss beneath the church. The very air inside the building felt lighter, as if the oppressive darkness that had plagued it for so long had finally been lifted. James and Lucky burst through the church doors just as the walls behind them gave way, the ground swallowing what remained of the cursed place. The village, still wrapped in an eerie pre-dawn mist, But something was different. The heaviness in the air, the suffocating sense of dread and secrecy, was gone. It was as if the darkness had never existed. As James caught his breath, he turned back to the ruins of the church, his mind racing. Would the villagers remember what had happened? Or would the curse erase all traces of itself, leaving only whispers of a nightmare that never was? Lucky nudged James's hand, his eyes filled with exhaustion, but also something else: understanding. James exhaled, looking down at his companion, the faithful dog who had never wavered. He realized something profound. Sometimes the greatest heroes walk on four legs, while others hesitated, while fear silenced the village. Lucky sensed the truth and never stopped fighting for it. His loyalty to Jessica, his determination to reveal the darkness lurking beneath the surface, and his unwavering courage had led James to uncover the horror hidden within the church. "Come on, buddy," he murmured. "Our job here is done." And as the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, they walked away, leaving the past buried where it belonged. The nightmare had ended, but the lesson remained. Truth, courage, and loyalty will always triumph over darkness. Lucky's unwavering spirit and James's determination proved that no secret stays hidden forever. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more thrilling, mysterious, and thought-provoking tales, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more incredible stories to life, filled with suspense, courage, and unforgettable moments. What did you think about Lucky's bravery? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. And if you believe in the power of truth, hit that notification bell so you never miss another story that keeps you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for watching, and remember, see you in the next story.